Welcome back to another FPL video. Today we're looking at the best wildcard team for Gameweek 21. Maybe some of you are already having that itch to play the wildcard and change your situation. And even if you're not, this can still help you with transfer plans, not only for Gameweek 21, but also beyond for double Gameweek 23. Maybe we'll still get a double Gameweek in 22. And not only that, also thinking about blank Gameweek 25 and all the fixtures in between. So let's try to get this video to over 300 likes. Let's also keep on pushing towards 20,000 subscribers. I hope to see you in the deadline stream tomorrow as well. And without further ado, let's get straight into this video. This might be the most contentious part of this video, but I've gone for Kepa Arrizabalaga simply because of his bonus points and saves potential. Chelsea aren't a great defence, we've covered this already, and I don't like Chelsea assets in general, but the only one I would consider having is Kepa Arrizabalaga. I wouldn't go for anyone else at this moment in time, but you could also consider Nick Pope, not to mention Ederson. Then you've got the likes of David De Gea and Meslier, especially if Man United and Leeds have a double in Gameweek 22, and let's wait and see if we get any confirmation very soon. But for the time being, Kepa Arrizabalaga is quite cheap. He's got a high ceiling, and when Chelsea keep a clean sheet, he can easily get those 6 to 9 pointers, which are very crucial, and his ownership is still quite low in the grand scheme of things. Ward is the second goalkeeper, but let me know if you disagree with this one. A few other choices to kind of mention are Ramsdale, who was excellent against Spurs and also is decent. He could be your way into the Arsenal defence week in, week out, not to mention Jose Sarr, but I think the main goalkeeper options for me are Nick Pope and Kepa Arrizabalaga. There are going to be issues with this wildcard squad in general, so bear in mind that Manchester United and Newcastle could blank in Gameweek 25 if both clubs reach the Carabao Cup final. And if that's the case and you have 4, 5 or even 6 of these players from both of these clubs, you're going to be in a bit of trouble in Gameweek 25. But as I said in my recent videos, for me it's more about quality rather than quantity of players in Gameweek 25. I'd be quite happy having 8 or 9 players in that game week as long as you cover the key assets and you also can enjoy the points from Man United and Newcastle players before that period and also after Gameweek 25. So I've gone for Botman and Trippier, but I do understand if you decide to go about things a little bit differently. Maybe instead of Botman you can go for another defender and maybe go for Nick Pope instead of Kepa and always have Ward to cover in Gameweek 25, but he's going to be facing Arsenal away, so bear that in mind. And the way Leicester are playing, you wouldn't expect too much at this moment in time. But Ben White is in here and you could just go for Saliba if you've got value tied up in him, but I would recommend an Arsenal defender. I know there is a bit of a temptation to go for 2 or 3 Arsenal attackers. I think 2 Arsenal attackers is fine and going for 1 defender rather than a triple up in the midfield or including the strikers like Nketiah or Jesus when he returns back from injury. I've gone for John Stones, and Man City have been very shaky recently defensively, and it has been the case all season. It always looks like they could concede a couple of goals, but their attacking is obviously so good, and John Stones has a double in Gameweek 23, and I would expect City to shore things up at the back, especially with players like Ruben Dias returning to the squad. I think he could be crucial, and if Dias and Stones play together, I could see more clean sheets for Man City in the not so distant future. Luke Shaw is still in here despite some maybe disappointing performances, especially in Gameweek 20. 2 pointers against Man City and Crystal Palace, but I still think is a good option. You can bench him against Arsenal and then start him in the weeks to come quite easily, and then the double up in Newcastle defence. My only concern would be blank Gameweek 25, as I mentioned earlier, but apart from that, Newcastle are arguably the best defensive side in the game. The biggest change in this kind of wildcard squad compared to previous weeks is having 8 attackers with 5 midfielders and 3 forwards that you could arguably start. You're going to have benching headaches. This is the problem with this squad, and I would personally not recommend it in the grand scheme of things for most people, but I'm going about things a bit differently with this draft, and I wanted to include some new names in the mix, such as Bruno Fernandes, who has been excellent since the World Cup, and he's only blanked once, which was against Nottingham Forest, but returns in every other game, and a 19-pointer in double Gameweek 20. The same goes for Riyad Mahrez. I think both of them offer excellent value, especially Riyad Mahrez, who's only 7.5 million. I would expect that to change very soon. And he's also got a double in 23, a good fixture in 21, and also some good fixtures in the long term. Man City ranks second in the fixture ticker over the next 10 game weeks, only behind Arsenal. And we've gone for 2 Arsenal midfielders here in Martinelli and Odegaard. Now, Trossard is about to complete his move to Arsenal, and that could take some minutes away from Martinelli. But Trossard is versatile. He can also play up front, and and he could also rotate in the cups such as the Europa League and the FA Cup. So let's wait and see how things pan out exactly, but I think Martinelli is the most likely to drop out in terms of the striker, whether it's Nketiah or Jesus, Martinelli himself, Odegaard or Saka. I think he's the most dispensable of the four, and he could see some more rotation. And in the early days of Arteta, Martinelli didn't really get too many minutes, which some Arsenal fans complained about. I still think Martinelli will be first choice on the left-hand side, but like I said, I think Trossard will eat up some of his minutes, so that's something to maybe keep an eye on in future weeks, but it might not happen just yet. I've gone for Riyad Mahrez himself, and look, De Bruyne is still a good option, but it was frustrating to see him not start, and I think that was mainly due to the fact that he missed training due to personal issues. But De Bruyne should be back in the side against Wolves in Gameweek 21. With Man City, though, you're always going to run the risk. If you have 2 or 3 Man City players, chances are that one of them will be benched from time to time, and it could happen very often, as we all know. Then we've gone for Rashford, who did blank against Crystal Palace. He was very underwhelming in that game, but since the World Cup, I can't think of too many players who have been better, especially from an FPL perspective. I would still go for him, not have any doubts, and even though in recent weeks, and also I've talked about Bruno Fernandes, I wasn't too sure about him, and he's not really the same level of FPL player as he was a few years ago. Well, since the World Cup, he's definitely changing that narrative, and he's performing much better, and I'm more open to having double United attack than I was a few weeks ago. Man United are still one of the most informed teams in the country. They are still fighting for the title, and they have a crucial game on the weekend, but after that, I still think the fixtures are there for them to really keep on pushing and do a great job. But this is a really solid midfield. My only problem with it is that you're going to have big benching headaches, especially with the front three we're going to talk about very soon. The front three are the highest scoring forwards in the game for a reason. I don't think we can have any objections about Toney, Haaland or Harry Kane. Just bear in mind that Ivan Toney could blank in Gameweek 25, and when you already have 2 Newcastle players in this case and 3 Man United players as well, if they reach the Carabao Cup final, you're going to have a lot of blank players in Gameweek 25 and you will struggle to get an 11 out. So if you really want to do that, then that will also be something you have to bring in the back of your mind. That's why you can maybe trim down some of these Newcastle Man United players. Maybe don't go for Bruno Fernandes, maybe don't go for Ivan Toney, or get rid of him just in time for Gameweek 25. These are all things to think about, but as I said earlier, for me it's about quality over quantity in blank Gameweek 25, where I think the ceiling could be lower anyway, so there's no point really making a big mess of it. We're taking hits to try get an 11 out there, but it's a very solid draft. We've covered new players as well, like Bruno Fernandes. He's someone I haven't been too sure about over the last year or so in FPL. He just simply hasn't been doing it, but since the World Cup, only 1 blank, constant returns. He's been very consistent, and he's showing some of the signs he was before Ronaldo's arrival and also in his first year and a half at Manchester United. Riyad Mahrez we've covered already, and a lot of these players as well, even John Stones, the back four kind of that I always talk about, Shaw, Botman, Trippier, Ben White, Kepa. So a lot of these are similar, but there's obviously new situations coming to the mix. Martinelli might not be as nailed as he once was, with Trossard arriving at Arsenal, and not to mention we could still have a double in 22. There's so many things to think about, and that's why for the majority of us, I would consider rolling and having more information, making transfers from Gameweek 22 onwards. But at this time of recording, in Gameweek 21, heading into that deadline, I would go for something like this on the wildcard. My only doubt would be the benching dilemmas, but let's go to FPL.team right now and sort them out, at least for the next 3 game weeks. One of the biggest benching headaches for most of us this week is Kepa versus Ward. I don't think either will keep a clean sheet, but in the long term, you're investing a minimal amount of money in the goalkeeper position, and it allows you to invest a lot of funds in the midfield and the attack. I would slightly favour Kepa just because Brighton are on fire and Leicester have lost every single game since the World Cup, but Kepa and Chelsea haven't exactly been that great either. Kepa's obviously produced 2 huge returns in Gameweek 20 and also in Gameweek 17, but he's also going to be inconsistent. I don't expect too many clean sheets, but I still would expect him to be one of the highest scoring goalkeepers in the game until the end of the season. We have a back three of Trippier, Stones and Botman. I think that will suffice. You've got the likes of Ben White and Shaw on your bench. That's a lot of cover, and I wouldn't be surprised if you have points there as well. Rashford, Martinelli, Mahrez and Odegaard is the midfield, with the front three of Toney, Harry Kane and Haaland. At the moment, I would captain Haaland, who wasn't particularly great against Spurs, but he did get his goal, and Harry Kane got an assist in that match, and he was the one that was quite underwhelming, despite the fact that both of them got a similar amount of points in the end. But that is what I would go for, to be honest. And the bench would be Fernandes first sub. I would not be very happy about that. Ben White second and Luke Shaw third. Ward as well on the bench. I mean, that could easily be a bench boostable team as well. So maybe if you wildcard now and you build this team, team, you could bench boost any single week, to be fair. So that's Game Week 21. I would probably captain Haaland, like I said, but you could still be a bit open-minded, go for an Ivan Toney or Harry Kane, and maybe even a Riyad Mahrez in the form he's in. Looking at Game Week 22, it would be a bit different. You've got Kepa at home to Fulham, where I wouldn't say it's too likely for a Chelsea clean sheet, but definitely more likely than Liverpool away, you would argue. Trippier, Ben White, Shaw as the back three. Rashford, Martinelli, Fernandes and Odegaard midfield four. Then the same front three as usual. And if Man United have a double game week, I would captain either Rashford or Bruno Fernandes. But look at the bench as well. Once again, very solid. Mahrez first bench, Botman second, John Stones third. You might be very uncomfortable benching that quality of player. You could easily have 20 plus points every single week on your bench, and it's certainly not ideal. If Man United weren't to have a double game week, I would still consider the likes of Rashford and Bruno Fernandes for the captaincy, but maybe you'd be more drawn towards a Haaland as usual. Now for Game Week 23, the final game week we're going to cover with this wildcard squad, I would go for a back three here. So Kepa's in goal once again. You've got Trippier, Ben White and Luke Shaw, and also some decent cover there with Botman and Stones second and third on your bench in this instance. They could both easily keep a clean sheet. We've got a midfield five of Rashford, Martinelli, Fernandes, Odegaard, Mahrez, and then Harry Kane and Haaland up front. Now, in terms of the captaincy here, Man City and Arsenal are the ones having double game weeks, so I would go for Haaland or Odegaard as captain, and depending on the form in the next few weeks, how they do, maybe I would reconsider and put the armband on Odegaard instead of his compatriot. But for the time being, Haaland captain, Odegaard vice, and you've got a bench of Ivan Toney facing Arsenal away, Botman and Stones, and you could easily change the order of this bench too, because Toney has the toughest fixture on paper. So let me know your thoughts on this wildcard team. I think the main criticism that will be levelled at it is too much squad depth, and I would completely understand that, but I think it's worth highlighting assets such as Bruno Fernandes, and it's good to be different. You don't have to cover all of your funds like I have done here, and you don't need to go for a De Bruyne or Salah as another premium, because right now Bruno Fernandes is doing better, Rashford, all these kind of cheaper options in midfield, Mitoma, March, Martinelli, Odegaard, Mahrez. You don't always need to go for the most expensive option. But thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Let's get this video to over 300 likes. Let's keep on pushing towards 20,000 subscribers. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and you can also follow us on Patreon and become a channel member. Patreon.com/DylanRCM. All the links on the description below. The same goes for the Discord server and the FPL League, so check all of that out. I wish you all the best of luck for Game Week 21 and the rest of the season. Enjoy the football, and I'll see you next time.